Well, we're back at it again.
That's right,
Consensus
folks.
on reality.
Welcome to another edition of
Isn't it an edition?
It's an edition.
Is it a limited edition? It's unlimited.
Unlimited, that's right. The
It's print on demand.
great God Pan is alive and well. Proclaims.
I thought he was dead.
He never died. I think that's kind of maybe what we're getting at with the topics of tonight's episode.
I was sailing, and I heard some guy yell, "Ah, Pan is dead!" And then I told people about it, and so now I really am invested in Pan being dead.
But yeah, you're gonna have to course correct that. We've got
He's dead. I heard that he's dead.
but you know it not to be true.
No, it's not true. Pan is alive. Well, Pan is the man.
Or arguably, it's not the man; it's everything.
It depends. Depends what horse you're betting on, or what goat in the goat race.
Jeez.
Talking all kinds of stuff today. A double episode.
That's right. Good job there, teasing the product. We will be doing a public episode, concentrating on some fascinating subjects, some weird horror, proto-cosmic horror that kind of influenced this strange labyrinth that we're going to go down. And then we're going to jump over to Patreon, patreon.com/consensusunreality. If you're one of our many Spotify subscribers, you can access that very easily on our page by clicking the little button at the top of our account for more of our subscription content. You'll see over 100 exclusive episodes for our paid subscribers, only $5 a month. That is the price of a cup of coffee these days. So do consider doing that. We do so much over at Patreon, so much exclusive episodes and going down some weirder subjects. We do a lot of experimentation there, and I think we're going to be talking and doing some of that on the Patreon, especially considering some of what we've deemed to be a locative ritual, an ongoing project for the last 5 years. Some of the subjects that we'll be talking about has sort of led us back on the path of that. So we've definitely done some really interesting experimentation, documentation of things like that on the Patreon. We also have our printed magazine or zine, our Journal of Shells. It's a quarterly issued item of archival and new printed materials, artworks as well, some music in there that can be scanned through QR codes. That is in our print subscription tier. We're doing a bunch of stuff with that, some music things and some printed literature that's not our Journal of Shells will be coming into people's mailboxes soon as well.
Some ephemera.
Ephemera, correct. We've done some weird printed ephemera as well, one of which was a cut out your own planchette and Ouija board with a sort of weird divination game board on the back that kind of feeds into this sort of geomantic inspired locative ritual things that we dabble in. It's the only way to support the show. We really appreciate it if you do. Like I said, at least two episodes a month are on Patreon only, and we do afterwards do our interviews there, and there's things like audio mixes and no commercials, a Discord server. There's online written content. We do a lot of experimentation and cool stuff there. So if you'd like to support the show, if you'd like to access more of what we do and some of the freakier stuff, some of the more enchanted things, certainly check that out. Dive in.
Yeah.
Wander with us.
now for the disenchanted portion of the show.
Yeah, I disagree. We've
Um,
been looking at Mr. Algernon Blackwood, one of the many things
yeah,
that we'll
looking at some
talk about.
Blackwood.
Yeah.
Um, we got some Blackwood. I've been looking into Pan. I'll probably maybe more on the Patreon side. We'll do a little demonstration of this bibliomantic process I kind of came up with spur of the moment. Maybe using this wonderful book about Pan that I've got. So you'll have to jump over to the Patreon to follow along with that. But yeah, it's been all Pan over here for me. Thinking a lot about uh, his role as a nature god, his role as a representative of all, in quotes, all. Um, what that means, the different ways that people have represented, worshipped, or fictionalized Pan over the last millennia or
Mm,
two. I guess one millennium. And then yeah, I figure it would be good to start with Blackwood, right?
mm.
Did you read The Willows as well?
I did. I read, I listened to an audio of The Willows
Yeah, yeah.
and Wendigo from 1907
Me
and
too.
1910. I listened to
Yeah.
some Mackin as well, which maybe I'll touch on, but really more of Algernon Blackwood has a different perspective than Mackin. I believe Mackin really is
Yeah.
kind of like a lot about these secret labyrinth, these occult labyrinths of people, right? So there will be a
Yeah,
subject
yeah.
like vampirism or the fairy world, but it's really about how people create these labyrinths within themselves, and each person sort of acts as this cache of a deep infrastructure of information and constructions of the world through these different lenses. Whereas Blackwood certainly is more of it conjures. It's interesting you mentioned Pan because it certainly conjures ideas of animism, right?
Absolutely. Or like it's almost more extreme than animism. It's often an almost adversarial
Mm.
relationship between what these places represent and what man wants out of his relationship with nature. Like in The Willows, of course, it's a story about a boat trip down the Danube, kind of along the coast, river coast, I guess, of Hungary, kind of in like rural Hungary, very deep in the undeveloped area at that time, and maybe still. And then the Wendigo is in a place that's almost certainly still not developed, the deep, dim forests of Canada, with a really sort of iconic French Canadian character in that story. What is it, Defago or something like that? Uh,
Yeah. DeFago. It's funny you touch
it's a
on.
scary story.
Yeah, they're both great, and you touch on something there when you say adversarial. I think that's really interesting because we know that Blackwood was like an outdoorsman, right? And he spent so
Yeah,
much
right.
time in nature. So you have to wonder if personally, if he was being leisurely with that concept, that sort of horror aspect of the indifference of nature. Although he certainly nails it. I mean, that's what
Yeah,
makes the Willows so incredible. And it's funny that at times, like the companion character in the Willows, the Swede, is
the Swede.
describing
Yeah,
the setting of this untouched island as unearthly. So it's like,
right.
which is comedic in a sense because it is it is earthly. It's nature. It's
Very, very earthly.
untouched nature, but it's incredible
Yeah,
because it's about. I think it really touches on colonial themes too, right? I mean, that's like a whole thing that's endemic in the weird horror is this feeling of alienation and otherness from nature. There's
yeah,
that like post enlightenment alienation feeling there that I think they're grappling with, as well as being a sort of stranger in a strange land, especially in the Wendigo. You have something like that, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Wendigo one is certainly, I mean, if it's not a direct commentary on, the white man's encroachment into sort of a native North American myth system and like sort of coming across a myth that doesn't they don't understand, so they don't really know how to protect themselves from. And the Willows too, I guess, or just yeah, sort of an alienation from nature and from even having like a good sense for what kinds of places are just innately inhospitable for one reason or another. And so much about the Willows is kind of talking about, the floods that would happen along the river that would sort of make the place dangerous or, sometimes it would even disappear. And just the way that nature is sort of written about in that is trying to highlight this sort of it's almost not threatening, it's just sort of alien. And yeah, I guess that sort of, alienation of a unprepared person. But I don't know. The way you were mentioning, Blackwood being a person who'd written about his own time spent as an outdoorsman and a camper,
Mm.
I feel like that kind of lends some kind of credence to his choice to set his weird tales, in a natural setting, because well, by experience, and even myself as someone who's not a huge outdoorsman, but someone who has spent some time in relatively remote natural places at night, um, or even if they're not remote, there is kind of an eeriness that comes about that if you're like in a truly remote place, it's probably, or especially before the car, like if you're like truly a week's walk from civilization, uh, it's probably another sort of layer of dirt piled onto your dread.
Mm. There's this
But yeah,
there's this other element to it too, where um, there's certainly the perceptual fear of nature in these stories, but there's also some kind of like environmental incantation that's happening through the perceptual shift in being in this environment. And this is kind of in the Wendigo too, where it induces a sort of uncivilized madness onto the victims,
yeah,
which in a way is I don't know if that's truly a negative thing. It's almost like beneath the horror, there's a sort of positivity, like a returning to that primordial state, that, pre-civilized or modernity,
yeah. I mean, yeah. In the Wendigo, the way the character kind of transforms, we think, for a time into like a smaller version of the Wendigo,
Yeah.
and the weird refrain he has, which is like that. I mean, I've read that story a few times actually, like 10 years ago and now, and maybe once in between. And that part of the story, like the weird like thing about his feet of fire and like this really
Yeah.
strange refrain that he keeps saying. I always thought it was kind of like, well, this is like ruining it for me. But for some, like, I always thought that didn't add up in the story. Like, I wish he was saying something that had more to do with whatever. But this time reading it, the way it's like, it's so strange. It felt like it worked better this time reading it. Like, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's like, I don't know if you have it at hand, but it's just this strange like one line thing where he's like, "Oh, my feet of fire," like something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it happens a few times in the story, and something about language and like and the way that the companions in these two stories are both sort of like we have these sort of straight characters who are the narrators.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the window it's he's a Scotch guy. Is that a Scotsman? And he kind of plays a straight man. And in the Willows it's the same way. And there's always this sense of disbelief. And that's common in weird fiction. maybe less common as we get into the more modern aspects of it, where like often the main characters will be in some way involved in a cult or like occultists themselves who like take a step too far. And
Hmm.
these like very early weird fiction, like proto weird fiction, really like Blackwood. It's often like a person who's sort of set into a weird situation, not someone who necessarily invokes it themselves. Which I guess you see in Mackin a little bit, somebody kind of conjuring this thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in Blackwood, it's, you know, they're in a setting that itself is, and yeah, that kind of brings up the whole idea of place, which is, of course, we mentioned it, but in the Willows and in Wendigo, it's so place based, like they couldn't have happened anywhere else.
Yes.
He takes some liberties with the Wendigo myth. Like if like and since, I feel like we have since learned more about what like the actual native Wendigo myth system is,
Hmm.
and it isn't really that much like what Blackwood is saying. So he kind of probably took like a sort of early settler kind of interpretation of that mythology and sort of twisted it into a horror thing.
I think
Because
in
I guess it has a
like
lot to do with cannibalism, right?
I'm not sure I don't know if it's a Lenape or Algonquin or if it's kind of just a northeast regional mythology of the Wendigo. Yeah, I don't 100% know that, but certainly Blackwood is projecting onto it in the way that Mackin does with these folkloric subjects, like projects onto it, but it kind of expands it into something else, and it fractures into
Yeah.
something wildly different, which is incredible. It's like how symbols
Yeah,
are,
yeah.
right? Like it unpacks the psychoidal, like the creative goo of the thing, and it starts to ooze out into other
Mm,
things. And I love that
yeah.
in the Willows, like there's so much idealism and animism with the character of the Swede, saying things like there are places where the emotional forces of former worshippers still run through, or
Yeah.
there's places where spiritual agencies are in reach and aggressive. I love that quote.
You know that scene, and this is like such a cliche, that scene in True Detective in the first season where where Woody Harrelson's like, I just want you to stop saying weird shit. It's
Yeah,
like that kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
feels like what the relationship between the narrator and the Swede is in the Willows, because
Ah,
there
that's
is
a
like this
great callback.
frustration.
Yes, I agree with that, and
Yeah.
I'm sure that the creator of True Detective, I forget his name right now, but that I'm sure that he probably thought on a lot of that weird fiction stuff. For
Yeah.
obviously, there's
Yeah.
Lovecraftian stuff, but certainly that good detective, bad detective,
Right, that dynamic. Like
speculative. Yeah,
the guy who's like a paranoid sort of like sort of tuned in to like the weird. It is very much like a Blackwood story in some ways.
right, right, right. Yeah, that's a good callback. I appreciate that. And there's also the thing of the character of the Swede saying, repeating, "Don't think about it. Don't
Right.
give them your thoughts because your thoughts will
Yeah.
manifest into reality." There's the famous
Your thoughts
quote.
make spirals.
Exactly. Our thoughts make
Yeah.
spirals in their world.
Yeah.
And I mean, to kind of tease back into what we were talking about with our own experimentation, our own location based ritual, which was essentially using combined processes of Ouija, bibliomancy, some geomancy inspired things, and randonautica. It is sort of like a reflexive concept of both divining locations, but also sort of having locations rise out of the sea that are sort of
Yeah.
maybe creating power zones out of because that's the whole geomancy thing, right? Is recognizing these power zones, these locations,
Right.
at least the earth part, recognizing these sites that would be power zones for constructing or building upon or using for ritual purposes. In this way,
Well, it's like dowsing, like ley lines.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that we were sort of divining information to seek these sort of info power zones and had some really interesting results with that, and actually went and visited these locations that we arrived at through seemingly randomized processes. And yeah, some really interesting results in that, one of which I wrote about in our Journal of Shells volume 2, but that's also available digitally on our Patreon. And you're sort of working off that same principle as well still, right? The teasing back into our Patreon later, but the Belmont, the
Yeah.
fountain.
Yeah. I thought, yeah, that came up a couple times in your sort of location-based mantic things, but it came up in mine a bit too, as well as towns and streets ending in FONT, font.
Mm.
So Mont and Font, which, mountain and fountain have been kind of, for some reason that's been nagging at me that these things keep coming up in the sort of because in some ways it's intentional. We're kind of like aiming this thing in some degree, like we things come up and we kind of latch onto them and we kind of aim that found bit of information in new directions. So I kind of thought that might, because there's so many, like it's the red car thing where now that I know, like, now that I'm looking for towns ending in Mont or Font, it's like, especially around here and like Jersey and Pennsylvania, there's just dozens and dozens of them. It's like, uh, yeah, so that seems, I don't know what exactly I'm going to do with it yet. Maybe we'll talk about it more in the Patreon portion, but yeah,
Yeah, when I think
the
about it,
power of place.
it's interesting because we considered so much of the potential dangers of performing ritualized activities without a direct purpose. But now when I look back and I feel more clearly about it as sort of defined by the more and more things that we've been looking at, I sort of feel like it was this divined way of moving through information. So sort of like being guided to certain caches of information that exist in places, and doing that through these divinatory processes, whether it be things like the way that somebody like Duchamp and John Cage would have used the I Ching for
Right.
creating music and works of art. I think that we were using these pseudo, I'm tempted to say chaos magic type inspired processes to divine information. And I think that in that way, it created some really interesting results. And I don't know, this Blackwood stuff just kind of, it reminds me of that, how the strangeness of being in new locations. And I think that was and is a big part of these location based experiments, is guiding you to new places and sort of unlocking new places that you wouldn't have previously thought to enter into, right?
Yeah. That's funny. I was listening to an audio version of The Willows when I was driving. I was driving down to Spring City, if you know where that is. It's in Pennsylvania, down Route 100. Um, Sort of a quasi Philly suburb. And usually I'll drive back off Route 100 to get back to Allentown. But what I ended up doing was going to a different city because I was meeting someone for coffee. And so it took me a very different way, like not the straight shot that I usually take. There was a bookstore there. So, there's a bookstore I go down to often. And um, instead of doing that, I went this very circuitous way through like Montgomery County, other things like that kind of area. And I was listening to the Willows, and there was this strange feeling, like this very, very deep wistfulness that I sometimes get when I'm driving in places that are unfamiliar. Like it kind of throws me back to this like almost childlike
Mm.
feeling where I'm like, like when you're sitting in the back seat of the car when you're like a kid and you're driving somewhere and it's like 2 hours away, but that's like years when you're younger. And so you're just like looking and like wondering what people's lives are like in the houses that pass by. I was kind of in this like weird trance-like state driving, just like, through these towns that I'd never really had any reason to go to. Like they're not far from me, but they're never in my way to get anywhere, so I never go there. So, and that's part of it too, like this weird proximity, like almost like weird little mirror towns to where you live.
Mm.
Uh,
But there's so
and
much,
yeah, just like this very strange feeling.
yeah, and there's so much
What?
unknown independent history to each of those places as well. These
Yeah, that's the feeling. Yeah.
sites that have been built upon and built upon, these colonial crossroads and trading posts that were built upon pre-existing Native American trade sites. And
Yeah.
this
It's
is
crazy.
coming from the Dara Mason book, but then based upon like animal migratory patterns. And it's in that
Yeah.
Blackwood story again, where it's like the echoes of prayers and rituals of people from generations before are still ringing through these places.
Yeah. I remember driving, I don't remember the name of the town, but there was like it was called like it was a big building, like a very big old building in like a small downtown. And it used to be a newspaper building. And I can't remember what they called it now, but like it had been turned into a brewery, of course. And they had like basically look they call the brewery what it was. It was like a newspaper printing press or something, and the name had something to do with that. And just yeah, so these like accumulations, and it brings to mind all this stuff about like the very sad decay of of American life. Um, I remember going up to like a coal region town a little while ago, seeing these wonderful, unbelievable mansions that, anthracite built basically. And um, just like the most beautiful Victorian mansions you've ever seen. And I was talking to someone who has lived up there. And I was like, well, what do you do now that there's no coal industry up here? And she was like, well, it's pretty much all healthcare,
Mm.
like hospitals.
Mm.
And that's just so common in like these towns that had this sort of industrial beginning in America. And now, I don't know.
But
For some
that's
reason, this has kind of been on my mind.
yeah, and you just provided I had written something down that I was thinking about earlier, and I didn't know how I would get there, but you provided a perfect segue. Um, this is an interesting thing, right? Because I was on a hike earlier with friend of the pod and recurring guest Mike Bruno, and we were chatting on this hike, and we had noticed one of these there's these weeds that are not indigenous to the east coast of the New World, and they grow in Philadelphia in backyards and stuff. And they'll start as these stalk weeds. They'll grow very rapidly, and then they'll actually grow into these massive trees with these huge canopies and these like elephant leaf. I think it might be
Oh,
called a
yeah.
princess tree, but these things are incredible because they'll rip apart slabs of concrete. They'll just grow right through them. And when you see that walking through this what was once old hemlock, it's still hemlock forest, and old growth of the Appalachian mountain region. It's hard not to be saddened by the idea that like some of these old trees, these great old growths, are now being decimated by these new forces of invasive beetles and these different types of
Right.
plant lives that are being introduced accidentally or not accidentally. I mean, that's sort of the course of nature, but in that way,
Yeah.
that is the indifference of the place. And nature is this sort of tesseract of time, and every place is a sort of tesseract where it's coalescing the past, the present, and the future. Because when you're walking through those woods that we were in, you could start to envision what this landscape is going to look like in 100 years, 200 years, almost like a wild jungle. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of crazy, and it's amazing. Like it's sad to see change and things that you knew disappearing, but it's also interesting to envision what's down the road, what's around the corner, beyond
Yeah,
you, beyond your life.
right. I was gonna say like that's just isn't that just Pan? That's like Pan,
Mm.
the spirit of Pan bringing this like alien thing in and assaulting this long-standing like what's the word? Like this this in not industry, this like this aristocracy. It's like he's kind of like taking this like, this forest has been this way for, 500,000 years and like he's like bringing this sort of like lustful um, you know, satiric like new blood into it and sort of like just implanting it in this sort of trickstery but also sort of violent way. But it's all Pan too, right? Not that, it's all nature and we are too. So he's kind of like the churn and the sort of, the witch's cauldron of nature and what
Yeah.
comes out of that is unpredictable and but predictable in that it's always going to be um in some way lustful and weird.
Well, that's sort of the irony of the declaration, right? That we referenced at the top of the episode. The great god Pan is dead, which is, I don't know if it's folkloric or true, but apparently a sailor uh,
From
was
Plutarch, yeah.
was porting at one of the great cities and saw the warning shots of modernity and had declared the great god Pan is dead. But no, the great god Pan never slept, and that's sort of the interesting thing I think that we're still coping with in the aftermath of the Enlightenment, is that not only did the Enlightenment solidify our psychological separation from nature, or ontological separation from nature, but it also it presented this false idea that we were in sort of a fixed place, that our progress had like set us on solid ground or something. And I think now that
Yeah.
we're coming to terms, or maybe realizing that is not the case. And that sort of explains maybe why there is this new plethora of occult movements. Even, I think that we might deem some of the wellspring of occult activity on the internet to be absurd, and people sort of start to intellectualize it, like, the magic of memes, and starting to come to grips with why Gnosticism has become so important through memes and stuff like that. But I think really, I mean, it's sort of this landscape of a new kind of neo-pagan on the internet, right? Like, even when we talked about the mythology of the Hat Man on our last Patreon episode, like, to me,
Yeah.
that the creation of that myth and the sort of Carcassic world that people were building in the Reddit Benadryl groups, it does sort of feel like a branch in this like weird cult, a pagan cult that would exist on an
Right.
on an island off the coast of Rome or Italy.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have
I don't
been
know.
as connected, but maybe there would have been echoes back to Athens or
Right.
to Rome or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
wherever. Like, it's interesting to sort of think about it in that way, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, even today, a lot of the like, this is maybe I shouldn't even say it. A lot of the Christians have a sort of uh, pagan approach to Christianity with the highly visual, stylized culture that they kind of create around their new sort of not new Christian, but the way that Christianity is spreading in younger people, I feel like is very, very much related to the meme magic of 10 years ago, and in that way feels paganish, which
Well,
is,
and
you know,
arguably that all of that was assimilated into Catholicism. I mean, that's there's a lot to
Yeah,
unpack
sure.
there, but certainly like I think that's kind of what I like about Catholicism, growing up Catholic, like in those ritualized environments, now learning more about mystery groups from antiquity, you sort of see the assimilated echoes of those things in the Roman Catholic mass and theurgy.
Yeah.
And I think that I went to see our friend and guest Timothy Grieve Carlson speak
Oh
uh,
yeah.
at Valley Green in the Wissahickon woods of Pennsylvania, which is this incredible historical area, pre-revolutionary colonial. And of course, Johannes Kelpius, who we've talked about, the hermit of the Wissahickon, who has as much lore and mythology as any sort of American mystic that you could think of, attached to his name. Timothy was Tim was talking about Kelpius and other things in this seminar, but one of the most interesting things that I think relates to Blackwood is that Kelpius was part of the Lutheran pietism movement, and there was what was endemic of these things was sort of a disconnect from nature, right? And when we think about the Puritans who came over here, we think about them reading the wickedness of nature and stuff like that. But that was not the case for Kelpius. Kelpius moved into the wilderness outside of the city of Philadelphia and stayed there in a small hermitage. And his one of his main writings, Metaphysic, I'm forgetting the name of it, but I could drop it in the comments. It essentially proposed that, so in Lutheranism and probably Protestantism, like the truth of the gospel, or the way to connect to God, is through the written word, the liturgy. But Kelpius, sort of iconoclastically proclaimed that the second book was nature. That was the second way to connect to God, which is really interesting because, I think that when we look back at the caricature portrait of colonial settlers, we think of them as thinking of the wilderness as wicked and something to be tamed and beaten back.
Yeah.
But this wasn't the case for Kelpius. He saw the solitude of nature as to be a direct connection to the spiritual, to the holy.
Mhm. That makes sense. I mean, it seems so obvious to me, but I'm living in this moment, which is so different from the moment that Kelpius lived in. But why? Yeah, I don't know. And like the whole issue of translation, I really can't even get past that. Like, how can it be the word of God if this is like such a Reddit take? But it really still nags at me. Like shouldn't it shouldn't they all know like whatever the New Testament, like Greek and Hebrew, shouldn't they all be reading it in that if they really want to experience the word of God? And
Jesus,
I was
I'm going
trying
to
to
let
think
you
of
just throw these matzo balls out there.
I'm trying to think of like what like an atheist would say. And anyway,
Yeah.
what about cells?
Yeah.
Um, no, yeah. But I have been thinking about that lately for some reason because some lady came into the bookstore and had asked me like about a certain type of Bible because, after that one they had taken stuff like it was like something about that. I was like, well, hasn't it been, you know, changed a lot many times?
Mm.
Um, and shouldn't we look to the world around, like the world that has been created as anyway? So it's kind
Yeah.
of like I weirdly independently came to that conclusion without seeing uh the talk on Kelpius, which I wish I had attended, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Um,
that's a whole different monster. That's kind of why I'm not engaging it. Not only do I not have anything really prepared to respond to that right now, but I think there's also so many different conversations about the language of the scripture and all
I
that. Like,
know.
and who's that guy who's like the new insane? Oh, I don't want to call him insane. I just mean that he's like super iconoclastic in what he's saying. But he claims that the Greek Bible is the
Oh
first
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bible,
That guy.
and he's
Yeah. No, I'm not trying to be like
detracting all
that.
of
I
that.
just
I'm
mean,
just saying there's so many different
yeah.
paths to work off of from there.
It does interest me though, like the if it's the word of God, which I'm I welcome. I welcome the idea that there's a linguistic or like almost narrative incarnation of God. I'm very, very open to that.
Yeah.
Or, in miniature, like the body of God being within the Torah or whatever, like, and I guess the New Testament too. Uh, it's like that's awesome.
What a shot.
Maybe
He's,
he's
I
in,
guess, the New
maybe he's in,
Testament too.
yeah.
What a side shot he
Let's.
takes on the way out.
He's probably in
Shooting
Finnegan's
from
Wake
the
too.
hip. Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing,
Or
right? Like,
everything.
don't think it, don't
Yeah,
speak it into existence. I mean, that's the power of the word, the power of breath. That's like a big thing in
totally.
animism too. I guess maybe we should touch
Yeah,
on
the breath.
one last thing with Blackwood is sort of the idea of crossroads, which has been something that we've been touching on a lot recently, is in there as well, right? I mean, there's the idea that you never pitch your tent on the edge of something. Like you don't pitch your tent on the edge of the woods and the field or at the bank of a river, because you're entering these zones of changing activity, right?
Yeah, commerce between the ruling elementals of the different zones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think that's probably good advice.
oh yeah, certainly. I mean, probably as, an outdoorsman, but also spiritually, although
Yeah.
I think maybe to tease on our way into the Patreon, like that's something interesting that I always love to. It's a little terrifying, but it also is interesting to note that when we start to engage these processes and start to try and divine information or maybe look at information through the fairy ring, then I think that there are sort of these like these boundary markers that start to arise. Like I was re-listening. An example of this, it's kind of comical, and these things just pop up. But like when I went to the speech in Valley Green, I've had some incidents of danger when following magical threads in that region. One of which I've talked about, where I
Yeah.
was almost hit by somebody running through a red light. Of course, when I walked out to my car after the talk, I had a flat tire and had to put on my spare and drive through the most treacherous roads of the Philadelphia area at night, which was sort of hilarious. And then today, as I was re-listening to the Willows on my drive back from the hike, in front of me was a license plate, and it had a license plate protector that said Willow Grove, and of course the last three numbers were 666. It's sort of this
Uh-oh.
trickster
Yeah.
comedy of like it is the thing of like when you stare into the void stares back. When you kind of start to like reorder the information, the informational infrastructure of like the world, when you start to try and play with that, I think that you get these sign markers that are trying to like, they're sort of booby traps, right? I mean, that's how we've referred to it in the past. It's these booby traps that you have to
Yeah.
get past these initiatory planes, maybe.
Yeah, that's crazy. I guess my sort of I don't have anything else to say about that. That's crazy.
Okay, let's
Um,
hop over. That's perfect timing. We're gonna keep talking on Patreon. You can access that on patreon.com/consensusunreality, or you can do that by clicking the button at the top of our Spotify account, and that should bring you a prompt to connect Patreon, and then you can get all of those bonus episodes right into your feed on Spotify. So definitely, check that out. $5 a month. We do tons there. You're going to get at least 2 episodes a month and a bunch of other things. Thank you for listening. As always, if you are a Patreon subscriber, hang on the line.
um, yeah, so I've been reading Patricia Merivale's Pan the Goat Guide.
Mm.
I talked about it a bit last week, actually, or at least I mentioned it, and it's really wonderful. It's really more of like a cultural history, a literary history of
Check
Pan
out
and where he was at.
patreon.com/consensusunreality. For just $5 a month, you can access our full episode archive, 5 years worth that's only hosted there. Regular exclusive episodes, which are ongoing and exclusively hosted at patreon.com/consensusunreality. Written content, a Discord server, and if you join our print tier club, you get access to our printed Journal of Shells, plus other printed and recorded materials in the mail. That's really cool, so check that out. Thanks for listening. As always,